My name is Colonel Brendan Kearney. I'm a U.S. Marine Corps officer, retired. I'm the director of the Living Memorial here at the Marines Memorial. The Marines Memorial Association is a 501c19 veterans nonprofit organization with a mission to honor the legacy of military service. The Marines Memorial Foundation is a 501c3 organization with the purpose of supporting the association's programs. Since opening our doors in 1946, the Marines Memorial has grown to 19,000 members all around the world. To support veterans and all those serving in the United States Armed Forces, the Marines Memorial accomplishes their mission through three action words: commemorate, educate, and serve, and through our lines of effort that include Gold Star Honor and Remembrance, the Living Memorial, Active Duty Aid and Assist, scholarships, education and commemoration events such as this program tonight. Programs including the Meet the Author series are only possible through the generosity of our members and donors. If you're interested in supporting the Marines Memorial by becoming a member or donating, I encourage you to speak with a member of the staff here tonight. A couple quick questions, and this requires folks have to stand. Do we have any D-Day veterans here present tonight? Korea. The Cold War, Panama, Gulf Wars 1 and 2, the one that is keeping on going. And do we have any of our allied forces here tonight? The Hersons really nicely donated four varieties rather. There's well more than 4 bottles out there. Their white wine is dedicated to the women Army service pilots. Their rose of Pinot Noir recognizes the merchant Marines. Their Chardonnay recognizes Robert Wright, who was a medic on Utah Beach and performed heroically 75 years ago today. And their Tempranillo recognizes the Medical Service Corps. Yeah, thank you, Jim, Vaughn. Rod joined the British Army at age 16. He learned to ski, survive, and fight in the mountains with the Norwegian Army. After graduating from the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst in 1968, he served for 25 years as a Royal Engineer officer in the British Armed Forces in Parachute, Armored, and Commando Forces with 3 Commando Brigade Royal Marines. As an infantry commander, he led British forces in active service in Northern Ireland in multiple tours throughout the 1970s and led 59 Independent Commando Squadron Royal Engineers in combat in 1982 in the Falkland War, where he was mentioned in dispatches. Macdonald is a mountain and Arctic warfare specialist who spent 5 winters in Norway from 1980 to 1985 working with Royal Marine Commando, Norwegian Army, and NATO units. He ended his distinguished career in 1993 in the rank of Brigadier upon his immigration to the United States. We're in for a great evening tonight. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our presenters, Brigadier General Roderick Macdonald, Phil Gioia, and Seth Givens, and I will turn this over to Brigadier General Macdonald.
Good evening. It's nice to be back. And we're here tonight, and our goal tonight is to remember the bravery of those who fought at D-Day through their own words, both Allied and German. Understanding of military history can only occur if we examine the experiences of those involved on both sides. By the way, these are rarely seen photographs of Red Cross nurses landing shortly after the men at Normandy. Both my late mother and aunt were Red Cross nurses, and the nurse on the top right is my aunt. You are about to hear individual stories scripted from many hours of veterans' audio and video testimony and hundreds of pages of transcripts. Each story, and there are 6 of them, has been edited down to around 6 minutes each. For clarity and brevity, each of them are composite, including elements from other testimonies. On the German side, Dieter Eckertz was a journalist for the German military publications Signal and Die Wehrmacht. Shortly before the Normandy landings, he spent hours interviewing soldiers and airmen on the Atlantic Wall. After the war, on the 10th anniversary in 1954, Dieter Eckhartz decided to track down the veterans he had interviewed and had survived. Eckhartz interviewed them about their experiences on D-Day. He intended to write a book about it, but he died before he could do so. After his death, his family just packed away his writings in a box, and 60 years later, his grandson, Holger Eckhartz, discovered his grandfather's writings by chance. He decided to finish his grandfather's dream of writing a book, and this turned into 2 books, which were published in 2015. The words spoken by the Germans in this presentation are taken from these books. Photographs and film are taken from various archives. The photographs are intended to illustrate the words spoken, but not precisely. For example, and I know there are many people here like this, please don't correct me if you see an ME-109F when I'm talking about an ME-109G. Now, there is some interlinking testimonies which you'll notice if you listen carefully. You'll also hear the criticality of leadership at the young officer level on both sides. Lastly, we would like to point out, and you will shortly find out, that Phil Gioia and I are not actors. Our ability to mimic accents, although I'll certainly try, is very limited. We ask you to please bear with us. I'll now hand over to Dr. Seth Givens, a historian at the Marine Corps History Division at Quantico, Virginia. Now, Seth is a real historian compared with me, and he'll talk about the strategic context, answering the question, why June 6th and why Normandy?
Before I start, I want to thank a couple people for getting me out here and for putting this together, particularly Colonel Kernan, General Hewley, and Mackenzie, who's not here. She's actually back in Washington, D.C. But thanks for those people, and thanks to Phil and also Rod. Rod really ran point on all of this, and he's the driving force behind it. So, before I get started, 2 little federal government disclaimers. Since I do work for the Marine Corps, I must say that what I say here tonight is not the Marine Corps' opinion nor the federal government's, but entirely my own. Thanks to you all for coming as well, and what's actually a really nice evening outside. Thanks for coming and spending time with us so we can commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day. Okay, I want to spend my brief time concentrating on an aspect of the Normandy invasion that perhaps many of you sit in the audience who served in the military might have some experience with. And it might not be the most glorious aspect of warfare, and it might not be the most interesting to some, but it is vital. I'm talking about allies, or the allies, as we know, the French, British, Canadian, and Americans who fought together on June 6, 1944. Now, coalition warfare is inherently difficult. It requires the merging of not just resources, but objectives. And the debate over these means and ends often becomes acrimonious in alliances, as compromise dictates the modification of one's national aims or even a philosophy of warfare. And Churchill, Roosevelt, and their military chiefs' discussions on this point were no different. So in discussing the role of Allied decisions about strategy that ultimately led to the cross-channel attack, I want to propose an argument, and it's this. It was not a foregone conclusion that 156,000 Allied soldiers and paratroopers would land or drop into Normandy on June 6, 1944. Now, when we enshrine historical events in our collective memories, we have a tendency, I think, to see them as fated. We all know that the invasion of France occurred on June 6, 1944, in Normandy. But why? Why then and why there? So I want to answer those questions while also politely reminding all of us that D-Day was not an American-only operation, and it was not the first major operation of the war either. In the days following the U.S. entry in the war, The Allies knew they would have to invade Europe eventually. Where and when that would happen was anyone's guess, though. The debate to figure out those details began on December 22nd, 1941, at a conference in Washington, D.C., codenamed Arcadia. For 24 days, Roosevelt, Churchill, and their respective military advisors sketched out how to wage the war. When they parted, they had accomplished three important things. The first is they formally established the Anglo-American coalition. The second thing they did was they formed the global strategy for the war. And the third thing they did is they merged the British Chiefs of Staff Committee and the American Joint Chiefs of Staff to form the body responsible for coordinating Allied strategy, called the Combined Chiefs of Staff. Perhaps the most important decision at Arcadia, however, was the so-called Germany First strategy. The idea was to contain Japan while building a force large enough that it could invade Europe and knock Hitler out of the war. That sounded simple enough, but there were two problems to that. The first thing was that there was the question of how to balance offensive operations in Europe with defensive operations in the Pacific. And Pearl Harbor made that different because a large amount of the Pacific fleet was either destroyed or disabled at Pearl Harbor. Second, Allied leaders believed they likely had one shot at invading Europe, as it was going to take 1, maybe 2 years, not mere months, to build up to an invasion of the continent. So in the interim, they were not sure where to attack first. Now, the Soviet Union was more interested in the second question than the first. The day the British and Americans met to convene Arcadia marked 6 months, it was to the day, 6 months of brutal combat between the Wehrmacht and the Red Army. Stalin frantically called for his allies to open up a second front. His troops faced 90% of the Wehrmacht, 90%, and he needed a two-front war to compel Hitler to divert his forces west. That was not an easy proposition either. Each of the big three had different conceptions about how to wage the war. Britain called for a peripheral approach that would avoid direct confrontation and therefore the bloodshed of World War I. This strategy made Stalin suspicious. He believed that London had imperial purposes and that Britain was just waiting for the Wehrmacht to bleed the Red Army, or the Red Army dry, yes. The Americans sided with the Soviets. They believed a peripheral strategy only postponed the inevitable. If the Allies wanted the Germans to surrender, they argued, then they would all have to attack France. By the time the Arcadia Conference ended, Roosevelt and Churchill compromised. They would not invade Italy, but they would not invade France either. Instead, they planned to land at North Africa. Now, as illogical as that sounds, both sides actually got what they wanted. Churchill, who arrived at the conference with North Africa on his mind, got his peripheral strategy. Roosevelt, who was assured that American troops would be engaged by the end of 1942, was satisfied because he believed that was important for domestic morale, to get Americans engaged in combat. The heads of state left the conference pleased, but the American Joint Chiefs of Staff walked away rather annoyed. With Germany standing in the way of fighting in the Pacific, they saw the Allies as pursuing a sideshow, not the main event. For the next year, that tension would remain. Churchill and Roosevelt based their strategic calculus behind Operation Torch, as it would be called, and notice the allusion, by the way, of Lady Liberty carrying the torch of freedom back to Europe. They based it on several conditions and potential outcomes. The first thing is the British 8th Army was already arrayed against Panzer Army Africa near Egypt. Second, securing North Africa protected against the Germans and Vichy French from disrupting Allied shipping in the Atlantic. And third, airfields and ports in the region would provide bases from which to launch the next stage of Britain's peripheral strategy, the invasion of southern Europe. Now, the discussions between where that should be varied from Italy to farther east. Above all, though, Operation Torch held closely to the guiding principle of Allied strategy that was worked out at Arcadia, which is close and then tighten the ring around Germany while building up for the invasion of France. While the heads of state set the strategy, and American planners in the War Department went ahead with devising plans for invading France. They believed that a Soviet collapse in summer 1942 would likely force a British capitulation, so they sought to launch an invasion in late July that would leave Hitler with a conundrum. Either press the attack against the Soviet Union and leave his flank exposed, or divert forces away from the Eastern Front and thereby blunt the plans he had to finish off the Red Army. Those plans went nowhere, though. Churchill saw to it that they were killed. He did so for a few reasons. The first is that the forces involved were going to be predominantly British because the Americans had not arrived in Europe en masse yet. There was no logistical support, and there were no resources for an invasion of that scale yet, and it ran counter to his peripheral strategy. The Joint Chiefs were again unhappy with Churchill and his chief of the Imperial General Staff, Field Marshal Alan Brooke. Not only were the British refusing to proceed with cross-channel plans for 1943, but their North Africa operation siphoned off American troops arriving in Britain for the invasion of France. Led by Admiral King and General Marshall, the chiefs contemplating threatening the British with ignoring the Germany force strategy and going forward predominantly with Pacific. After all, the Americans controlled the strategy completely in the Pacific. And they were eager to unleash the full force of the U.S. military there. Now, whether their threat was a bluff is unclear to historians, but Roosevelt did intervene, we know that, and forcefully, and he sided with the British and quashed the Joint Chiefs' idea of ignoring Germany first. Operation Torch commenced on November 8, 1942, with General Dwight Eisenhower commanding the Allied Expeditionary Force. There would be fighting until May 13, 1943, when Field Marshal Airman Rommel's 240,000-strong Africa Corps finally surrendered. There were 526 Americans killed in the operation and 574 British. Now, a few months before the German surrender, the Allies reprised the same debate that they had the year before. Should they do peripheral strategy still or cross-channel invasion? This discussion took place in Morocco at the Casablanca Conference, which was held between January 14th and January 24th, 1943. Roosevelt called for continuing the momentum in the Mediterranean with an invasion of either Sicily or Sardinia. And this was music to Churchill's ears. This is what he wanted to do anyway. This was exactly what the Joint Chiefs did not want to do, however. And the Americans relented, though, eventually. They relented once again because they saw the value of forcing Italy out of the war early and therefore isolating Hitler politically. Moreover, taking Sicily, they knew, would secure the Mediterranean all the way from Gibraltar to Suez. Operation Husky, as the invasion of Sicily was to be known, kicked off on July 9th, 1943, and lasted until August 17th. It resulted in an Allied victory, not just on the battlefield, but also politically, as Italy, a month after the end of fighting, pulled out of the war, and the Germans, therefore, in Italy became occupiers, not allies. The Americans lost 2,783 there, and the British 2,062, and the Canadians 562. The U.S. Fifth Army landed on the beaches of Salerno only 3 weeks after Operation Husky concluded. This was mainland Italy. Operation Avalanche, as it was called, kicked off a crucial new phase of the war. It was, as one official Army historian put it, the opening act of a drama that was to reach its climax in Normandy 9 months later. And he's right when he says that, because whereas the previous operations took planning and logistical precedence over cross-channel attack, now the slow grind up the Italian peninsula would support the main event, the invasion of France. So why the change? Well, it came as a result of the Trident Conference in Washington, D.C. in May 1943. Churchill and his military advisors had pushed for Italy being the primary effort again, not France. But the exasperated and impatient Joint Chiefs pushed back. Churchill relented and agreed to May 1st, 1944 for the invasion of France. To support the operation, there was also to be a simultaneous invasion of southern France, with the intended effect of compelling the Germans to split their forces and thereby making the Normandy invasion more effective. Trident, therefore, signaled a shift in the Anglo-American alliance, whereas the British were the ones who were most powerful in the alliance before. After Trident, the Americans are. It's important to note here, and this has been my thesis throughout this, that Allied strategy in the Mediterranean was somewhat ad hoc. Though Arcadia way back in December 1941 had laid out the structure of Allied strategy, there was no master plan for the logical progression of operations. The availability of resources and present conditions dictated strategy more than anything else. As a consequence, this meant time and again that the invasion of France was delayed for various but logical reasons. This ad hoc nature of planning exacerbated tensions within the Anglo-American alliance, however, over differing philosophies about the conduct of war. Now, to be overly simplistic, the Americans were impatient, whereas the British were cautious. This was as true in strategy as was in tactics, and is often the reason why the British and Americans aggravated each other in operations, particularly in Sicily and then Italy, when British commanders would call for thorough preparatory fires, while the American counterparts argued for surprise and speed. With a tentative month now decided for the invasion of France, May 1st, 1944, the Allies stood up the planning body responsible for designing the cross-channel operation. British Lieutenant General Frederick Morgan, an undervalued figure in popular history, I believe, became Cossack, which was short for Chief of Staff to the Supreme Allied Commander. In just 6 weeks, Morgan and his Anglo-American staff created the basis for the operation that would be known as Overlord, and also Operation Neptune, which was the naval component of the Normandy invasion. Over the next 12 months, Morgan tweaked the plans, often sleeping in his office, and apparently taking to heart Sir Alan Brooke's charge to him, "It won't work, but you bloody well must make it." Why did the Cossack planners choose Normandy then? This was for several reasons. First, they ruled out the shortest distance from England to Pas-de-Calais, since it was too obvious and the Germans had built up defenses there. Second, Normandy was conducive to an amphibious assault because it had wide, easily accessible beaches, and the Contentin Peninsula shielded it from westerly winds. There were also no tall cliffs which the Germans could emplace artillery, which they had farther up the coast. Third, Allied air cover could reach Normandy and thus protect the amphibious assault. And last, quite simply, the Germans didn't expect it. By December 1943, Morgan's Overlord plan was in the hands of Eisenhower, who had been appointed commander of Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. He increased the scale of the amphibious force from 3 assault divisions to 5, and he added 3 airborne divisions, arguing that there needed to be a wider front. This expansion meant more landing craft was needed, which meant more time to get landing craft to Europe, which is why they pushed it back another month, and we get June 5th, 1944. So what did the plan look like? Well, the invasion fleet, the largest armada ever assembled, was comprised of 6,939 vessels, divided into 2 task forces. The Western Task Force was American, the Eastern Task Force was British. This predominantly British fleet was to sail from 5 major ports in Britain and make the nearly 100-mile transit across the Channel. Meanwhile, while the Armada was sailing, the airborne divisions, comprised of a little less than part of 11,590 aircraft that took part on the operation, would drop paratroopers behind the beaches, and they would therefore secure then the avenues off of the beach so that the landing forces could get inland. There were 5 landing beaches. Utah and Omaha to the west were American, Gold, Juno, and Sword to the east were British and Canadian. Weather, resources, and coordination with the Soviets dictated the timing of the assault, too. This is how you get June 5th. The tides were the perfect, or were the best for the next few months. But there was poor weather that day, so Eisenhower decided to push it back to June 6th. This is how we get the immortalized now June 6th. Now, I realize it's difficult for us to imagine what the British, Canadian, French, and Americans, and roughly 450 Marines aboard ships, American Marines, by the way, would have seen that morning. What does 6,939 ships look like? What does 11,590 aircraft look like? Rod and Phil will go into this about personal perspectives, but I think perhaps the best way for us to understand it before that is to concentrate on what the force took with them, because they had to take everything that they had in France with them across the Channel. So here's some numbers. There were 137,000 jeeps, trucks, and half-tracks, 4,217 tanks, 3,500 artillery pieces, 300,000 telegraph poles, 16 million tons of food, fuel, and ammunition, 240 million pounds of potatoes, 54 million gallons of beer. Was for the British? 1 million gallons of water just for the first 3 days. 800,000 pints of blood plasma, and last, 260,000 grave markers. They would need 2,500 of those grave markers after the first day. By the end of Normandy operations in August, they would need 70,000 more. So now that you've heard the context, Rod and Phil will provide you with first-person perspective.
Can you tell me your name and how old you were when you joined the Army?
My name is Ivor Anderson. I joined the Royal Engineers as an apprentice in 1938 when I was 14 years of age.
What is an apprentice? What does it mean?
Well, Royal Engineers, not just combat engineers, we have a construction trade as well. And that's what I learned at Apprentice College. I was an electrician.
I see. And what was your mission on the night of the 5th of June?
The 6th Airborne Division had to take and hold the bridges over the Caen Canal and the Orne River. We had to hold it until we were relieved. We were Pathfinder troops. We'd been told heavy upright posts had been placed all around the bridge region to prevent gliders landing. Our job was to clear the landing ground of obstacles for gliders of the Airborne Division and then defend that landing zone.
I can only imagine the atmosphere in the aircraft as you were flying in. Can you describe it?
Sure. We were all in pretty good spirits, and there was a bit of a sing-along during the first part of the flight. There was a lot of shuffling around, adjusting the heavy kit we were carrying, and once we were over the channel, some of us were airsick, and we all quietened down with our thoughts as we prepared to jump into the darkness.
Amazing. How did the jump go?
Well, when I jumped out, I had a heavy Bren gunner strapped to my ankles. This broke free on the way down. Funnily enough, looking back, I was more concerned about being put on a charge for losing my gun than about what the enemy was going to do to me. Much to my surprise, we were dropped exactly in the right place, which was unusual for paratroopers.
I'll say. And what happened after you landed?
Well, we were being shelled and mortared as soon as we landed, and that was really frightening. We were running around looking for obstacles to clear. We had a lot less time than we thought as gliders started coming in at all angles, only about 20 minutes after we landed.
Did these gliders land close to the objective, the bridges?
I was astonished at how close they landed, right up to the barbed wire fence, only a few meters from the bridge. One stopped so suddenly that both pilots were thrown out of the front, crashing through the windscreen and landing in front of the glider.
How long did it take to actually seize and control the bridges?
It all happened very quickly. We were defending the landing site, and I was watching the glider troops, kind of run out of the glider that had stopped right in front of the barbed wire fence. A young officer, later I heard his name was Lieutenant Den Brotheridge, led his platoon running across the bridge. Someone on the German side fired a flare. Perhaps the flare's light exposed the young officer, or maybe it was just bad luck. But a burst of machine gun fire lashed out across the bridge. A bullet hit the young officer in the neck, and he fell mortally wounded. So intent were his men on the attack that no one noticed until later. I was struck by the idea that this lieutenant had spent so much time preparing and training his men only to die in the first few minutes. I thought, what a waste.
I agree. Who was defending the bridges? What sort of troops did they have? Were they elite units?
No, not at all. The bridges were defended by Poles and Russians, with some old Germans mixed in. Faced with screaming glider troops racing out of the darkness, they ran, shouting, Fallschirmjäger. The soldiers in the bunker and trenches were quickly overwhelmed, and we sent out the code words, Am and Jam, which meant both bridges were in our hands.
Well, so far so good. What happened next?
It was only a short time later that 3 German armoured vehicles rumbled down the road in the darkness. I don't know who had the Perrett, but it was fired accurately, launching the bomb straight into the side of an enemy half-track, which caused a massive explosion, much greater than we expected. We later discovered that this was a German engineer vehicle filled with mines and explosives. The huge size of the explosion caused the other 2 vehicles to retreat. The German engineer vehicle burnt for over an hour. The Germans continued probing attacks. At one stage, a German half-track made it onto the bridge before it was destroyed. One of the wounded was Major Schmidt, the German commander of the bridge defences. We treated his leg injury and gave him morphine. Around 0300 hours, 7 para, that's the 7th Battalion, the Parachute Regiment, began trickling in to bolster our defensive. A couple of paras took over a German anti-tank pack gun in a defensive position called a Tobruk on the east side of the Canal bridge. They found 3 German soldiers sleeping in the underground barracks with rifles stacked nearby. I think they were surprised to be woken up by British paratroopers.
I can't imagine being asleep in an action like that, but I believe you came under attack from German gunboats on the Canal at that point?
Yeah, it was now light and we were under constant sniper, mortar and shell fire. A German patrol boat opened up with a 20mm cannon. By now, the paras had worked out how to operate the German anti-tank gun, and they opened fire on the boat. They missed it with their first shot, but they hit it with the second. A Perrett destroyed the wheelhouse on the other gunboat.
How long did you actually have to hold out in this position?
Well, although we were under fire with probing attacks, no full coordinated assault was mounted by the Germans. I presume they had more important issues to think about.
I agree. When did you link up with the British landing forces?
About 1300 hours, a few glider troops heard bagpipes. Yeah, when they mentioned this, all the others laughed at them. But after a few minutes, the sound grew louder and louder. It was the 1st Special Service Brigade, a few months later renamed 1st Commando Brigade because of the connotation Special Service SS. They were full of Army and Royal Marine commandos, commanded by Lord Lovett. Since radio communications were so poor, Lovett posted Piper Bill Millin at his side, knowing that the bagpipes would be a good recognition signal and they'd not be fired on by our own troops. Within minutes, I recall one of our D Company men standing up and playing the bugle in return. Why he had a bugle I do not know to this day. The commandos, wearing their green berets, were soon running over the Canal Bridge, later renamed Pegasus Bridge. Several of them were hit by sniper fire. With the commandos on the bridge, the German pressure slackened. Just before midnight, the 2nd Battalion of the Royal Warwickshire Regiment marched up to the bridge, and we handed over the defence to them.
Well, you must have been relieved in more ways of the term. What happened to you after that?
Oh, well, I spent 5 weeks laying and clearing mines and was supporting the infantry. And before I suffered a shrapnel injury, I was either a mortar or a shell. I don't know which. We were holding a position and we were hit. The next thing I remember was waking up in the Queen Elizabeth's Hospital in Birmingham. It turned out I'd been half buried in debris, along with a whole bunch of shrapnel in my leg. They pulled me out, but I was really lucky.
Well, thank you, Ivor, for giving us such a detailed account of what happened to you on D-Day at Pegasus Bridge.
Can you tell me your name, age, rank, and unit at D-Day?
My name is Marvin Perrett, U.S. Coast Guard, landing craft coxswain. I was age 19 on D-Day.
Marvin, what ship were you on, and when did you launch your landing craft?
My ship was the USS Bayfield, that's APA-33. She was an attack transport. We dropped anchor about 12 miles offshore Normandy at 02:30 in total darkness. They put out our landing craft and dropped them in 3-foot seas. We would then move out in a configuration of about 12 boats to a circle, and one by one we'd be hailed alongside the ship at certain debarkation stations. About 36 troops would come down the net, like a big cargo net, into that bouncing boat. And then once you loaded those troops, then you'd go back to your circle and go around again until all 10 or 12 boats were full. So these guys are, well, like all of us, Navy and Coast Guard personnel alike, in these slow-moving circles. Every time you got to the top of the circle, you're eating your own diesel fumes, and as a result, many of these guys were a little worse for wear before they ever got to the beach.
Well, how long was it before you headed into the beach, Marvin?
We kept circling from maybe 02:30 to 03:30, and then maybe 4 o'clock. Now we're starting to head toward the beach, distance of 12 miles. We had no radios or anything like that. It was all done by flags from the control vessels. As you'd move up, you'd get the signal to move up to that next control vessel, and from there, we changed into a configuration of line abreast because you're going to hit the beach like that. So you're just keeping that line abreast configured because, see, they got these boats all the way back to, well, all the way back out to sea. You got hundreds of boats behind you in the same configuration. So now Our 12 boats are charging off toward the beach.
So how was your first run into the beach?
Well, I had all these soldiers, and as we're going along, I'm real busy. I mean, I've got these 4 or 5 boats to my right. I've got 4 or 5 boats to my left. And for whatever reason, these 36 guys are standing there instead of looking out front, out the iron ramp where they're going. Every one of them in the boat are staring me down, eyeball to eyeball, not saying a word to each other. They're not telling me anything, and it kind of unnerved me because I didn't know what was going through their minds. And finally, one of them piped up and said, "Hey, look, Cox, we landed at Sicily and Salerno a few months ago, and the coxswain put us off in about 3 or 4 feet of water. And we're telling you, you better not do that today."
Well, how did you respond to that one?
Well, man, hey, you're not going to get an argument out of me. These guys are infantry, and I'm no fool. That guy's standing behind there with a loaded Thompson submachine gun, and I'm going to get in an argument with him? So I assured him I'd give it my best shot. Well, as we're going along, they had this Army lieutenant standing right in front of me, and he was a chaplain, no less. And every once in a while, in the heat of battle, I'd notice his face was white as a sheet, so I figured, boy, does he have a real bad case of the nerves, but don't we all? But what I should have known, the poor guy was seasick, and of course, being jammed in there as he was, he did the only thing he could do. He just stuck his head out over the side of that boat, up to the wind, and of course, you might imagine it was the windward side, and I caught all of him in my face. And the problem was then I couldn't see how to drive the damn boat, and I didn't want to lose my position because that would cause all kinds of problems. So my trusty motor mac, my assistant, my motor mechanic, he sees my dilemma. He reaches over, he gets a bucket of seawater and said, "Close your eyes, boats." And I said, "They're already closed." And man, he hit me. So boy, he hits me with his bucket of water and he said, "Do you want another one?" I said, "Yes, that was strong medicine." So he hit me with a second bucket, and this time with all these kids in the Army, they busted out laughing. And it was the thing that took to dispel their fears. They probably thought, well, if the kid can take this, I guess he'll get us ashore safely.
Well, what happened next?
We headed into the beach. It was still dark, but then all the ships started firing behind us, and it was a very awesome sight. All of a sudden, bullets were hitting on the side of the boat, and the water looked to the right. I seen a boat get hit, and that's when I realized what we were really going into. Remember, this was my first action. As I hit the beach, Wally Lawton lowered the ramp, and the soldiers started pouring out, and I saw them start to go down. I saw them get shot. I saw their faces blown right off. God, it's a sight I'll never forget. It's been on my mind since. This is the first time I ever talked about it, and I hope it's my last. Well, anyway, as they were going off, there was one soldier there who didn't want to leave. I guess he froze because he'd seen what happened. And we were instructed not to take anybody back unless they were wounded or dead. As I lifted my arm to tell him to get off, he was shot. The round came right out of his back as he fell into the sea. So as quick as we got away, there was another 12 boats coming right in behind us all the way out to sea. Those kids, they didn't want to get wet. They got killed.
Wow, that must have been a shocking experience. What happened on your return trip?
So we're going back to the ship. And I have a confession to make. I've got to go 12 miles back to find the Bayfield. I didn't hurry. I took my time because in those few short hours, I'd come to realize that as soon as I got back to the ship, it's another load of whatever, and it's back to the beach again. And I thought, man, I've done my part for the day. I don't want to push my luck anymore. Let somebody else take a shot at this. So anyway, I took my time as we were going back. It was to no avail because it was my luck when I got back to the ship, they promptly hailed me to go back to the after starboard boom where they were loading a very unusual vehicle down into my boat. And of course, with 3-foot seas, it would kind of bounce around. And so, I get this thing inboard and on board, and next thing you know, here comes a sergeant and a corporal coming down the debarkation net to join up with that vehicle. So when they get in the boat, I kind of like turn to the sergeant and I say, "Okay, Sarge, what's the game plan?" And he said, "Well, just go around over to your loading gangway and we'll go pick up the boss." I said, "Pick up who?" "Well," he said, "you'll find out when you get there." Okay, big deal. So I go around, and as I approach the gangway, they've got this little fellow, short, kind of reminded me to this day of Clark Gable. He had a mustache kind of like Clark. But we're standing there, man, and he's jiggling around on this wooden platform from the ship's gangway, and when he called, he jumped. Fortunately, my three-man crew did their job because, well, they caught him and he landed into the bouncing boat in these 3-foot seas, which prevented him from getting a bloody nose or falling over the side. I'm so glad they got their job done so well because when he stood up in the boat, I saw the 2 stars on his shoulder. Major General R.O. Barton, Commanding General of the 4th Infantry Division, in my boat. And I'm proud to tell you that Marvin Perrett, U.S. Coast Guard, brought General Barton ashore safely on D-Day in my New Orleans-built Higgins landing craft bearing my numbers PA 3321.
Thank you, Marvin, for that graphic account.
So, kannst du deinen Namen und deine Verantwortung am 6. Juni mitteilen? Oh, entschuldigen Sie, auf English. Can you tell me your name and your responsibilities on the 6th of June?
I'm Heinrich Runder. On June 6th, I was a Grenadier, a rifleman with the German 709 Static Infantry Division, manning the defenses on the Contentin Peninsula.
So you are a lancer, a soldier. And Herr Runder, I believe you're in a position to witness part of the assault on Utah Beach from a location in the west?
Yeah, yes, I was posted in a Widerstandsnest, resistance point, on the western edge of the Americans call Utah Beach. Why they call it Utah, I do not know to this day.
Ja, Amerikaner. Verrückt. So, can you tell me something about your unit? What kind of organization did you belong to?
We were static infantry, which other units jokingly called the belly army, because of the age of our troops. Some of our men were over 40. I can see there's some over 40 here too. And others much younger. Many were classified as physically and mentally unfit, otherwise unsuitable for service in the mobile combat divisions.
Yeah, I've heard of these organizations. They were called goulash battalions, yeah? What do you mean by otherwise unsuitable?
Let's be honest, Herr Eckert. Any conscript army will contain men who are rather slow-witted or men who are unable to think like frontline soldiers. There were men who had suffered mental problems as a result of being in combat, especially on the Ostfront. My own cousin was awarded the Ritterkreuz, Knight's Cross. Despite his bravery, he had a mental collapse. By 1943-44, we were so short of manpower that we were transferred to the Atlantic Wall. France was a good place to send such unfortunate men. They could recuperate to some extent while still serving, but we knew an invasion would occur sooner or later.
Did you expect an invasion in June of 1944?
Yeah, personally I did. Logically, this had to be in the summer because of the rough season, the fall and the winter.
Yeah. So on the day that they came, what was your experience?
On the night before the invasion itself, we started to be aware the Allies were mounting some sort of operation. The air seemed to be absolutely come alive with the sound of aircraft. Timing was remarkable. They must have calculated their approach exactly, so they came over France literally the very moment night fell. We received a telephone call from a lieutenant telling us to watch for paratroops, Fallschirmjäger, and glider troops. Our lieutenant was moving from trench to bunkers in our sector, maintaining close contact with all our men. To the southeast, we could see very large numbers of aircraft moving at medium altitude. When I say large numbers, I mean literally scores of planes going over at any one time. And as soon as these planes moved away, another 20 came to follow them. It was a dreadful sight for us, because these were all Allied planes, and no sign of air combat apart from sporadic flak. We grudgingly admired the Allies for their organization. The formations of those planes were perfect, even in the dark, and it impressed us greatly.
It must have been very demoralizing not to have the Luftwaffe in action over the beaches, but how did the morning of June 6th unfold for you?
At first light, on the 6th, we could make out the sea more clearly, and the light rain stopped falling. I can tell you, my throat went dry, and my hands began to shake.
So what was your first view? What could you see on the water over there?
A vast number of ships, absolutely vast. I could see a line of ships that was literally endless. It simply stretched out into the distance, and behind that first line was a massive formation of ships going back many kilometers. It's unmöglich, impossible to give you the impression of that formation unless you saw it yourself. But the strangest thing about this sight, now I think back, is that apart from the planes, there was no noise. Many of our bunkers did not fire because the range would have been too far. But the silence along our coast was very strange to experience. Then we were strafed by enemy Mustang-type fighters before the invasion ships began to approach the shoreline. We had 2 men wounded who were bundled off behind the dunes to the field treatment center. In the middle of all this confusion, the thought came to me that these Mustang aircraft were very handsome machines. They were polished metal, and the metal caught the light from the east as they flew off. One of our young lads shouted these planes had flown across the ocean from America. We cursed him for being so stupid, but it shows you how simple-minded some of our troops were. As the formation came closer to the shore, and then the warships started the bombardment.
And you experienced this bombardment?
There was mist on the sea, but we saw enormous flashes from the guns of the bigger warships. We saw explosions on the shoreline which raised large plumes of dust and smoke. This was a terrible sight because we knew who the men were down there on the shoreline, and we felt sorry for them, even though many of them were Russians.
These soldiers were actually Russians?
Yeah, that was the zone that was manned by Russian units that were part of the German army. Thousands of them had changed sides, and they were captured in Russia. The Allies knew about this. Now, I'm jumping ahead now to what I learned after I was captured. But among the American and German troops were commissars from the Red Army, who were there specifically to search for the Russian defector troops. When taken prisoner, we saw the Russians separated off and handed over to the Russian commissars right there on the beach. They were put on ships from Normandy and sent back to Russia via the Baltic. You can only imagine what happened to them.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but let's get back to June 6th.
We were bombarded with rockets, which shot out from smaller ships on the edge of the formation. They exploded on the seawall below our trench. I could feel the blast, which made my eyes ring and nosebleed. Some of our men were blinded with sand in their eyes. The rockets came again and again. One of the rockets struck a bunker mounting a PaK anti-tank gun and simply blew it to pieces. A gun crashed down near a trench. A tail fin unit from the back end of the rocket flew along the trench, hitting men randomly. I felt if it went on for much longer, we would all be carved to pieces in our trench.
Yeah, that was quite an experience. How did the rest of the day progress? How did your men react?
Our lieutenant came and said the Americans were storming along the high ground above the beaches to the south. We saw a Luftwaffe fighter, a Messerschmitt, go over our beach very fast, and then it turned inland and disappeared without shooting. That was the only German plane I saw on that day. The sky was absolutely full of Allied planes. We ate our midday rations, watching the planes.
But in the midst of this chaos, you actually ate your rations at such a time?
We had our rations, so we ate them. Because this is France, our army food was supplemented with very good sausage and cheese from the French. And our officer allowed us to drink some schnapps. I have a good memory of that meal. We were all together. We knew that many of us would probably be among the fallen by sunset. There was nothing we could do to avoid that destiny. It was better to accept it. We were again strafed by Jabo fighter bomber planes of the Thunderbolt class, I think, which fired out rockets from under their wings. These rockets exploded with a very bright red flame. One exploded at the end of our trench. The next moment was complete hell and chaos. I still struggle to make sense of it all. The burning liquid blew up in a great ball which spurted along our trench like a big water pipe that was burst with water coming out under great pressure. There were half a dozen men covered with this burning spray. The liquid was sickening in the way that it worked, some kind of gasoline mixed with rubber or nylon or something like that. It stuck like glue to uniforms, skin, hair, and bodies. I ran like a madman. When I turned back, many of our men, who a few minutes ago were eating their last meal, were screaming, completely on fire.
An awful experience. And how did you react to this event?
We ran. But we were stopped by our lieutenant, who ordered us to go to the observation bunker nearby, which had a 34 Type 34 machine gun, which I was trained on. When I looked back through the slits, I could see Americans already moving towards us on foot. It was my first sight of the enemy as individuals in France.
And how did these Americana look to you?
It's strange, the thoughts that come in your mind at such moments. Their green uniforms stood out quite strongly against the sand and earth on the top of the cliffs. I remember I was surprised their assault troops didn't have camouflage uniforms as our Panzer Grenadiers had. I fired on them from about 600 meters. I had one of their men in my ring sight, and as soon as I started firing, I moved along the line and shot men behind him.
What manner of emotions did you have when you did this?
I was too shocked and dazed to have emotions. I could still smell the burning incendiary fires, and my eyes were still streaming from the acrid smoke. It was a short battle between our observation post and these Americans.
So, what weapon did the Americans use?
I think it was a Panzerschreck, a bazooka-type weapon. They fired a number at us, with one exploding close to one of the slits, which sent fragments of stones and concrete inside the bunker smashing into us. I was hit in the face, which broke my cheekbone and knocked my front teeth out. I do not remember much after that. I staggered out of the bunker to seek medical help, and I saw an American soldier climb on top of the dome, throwing grenades inside. There were American soldiers everywhere. I was unarmed and bleeding.
So, at this point, did you surrender?
I was so dazed, I just stood there. One American hit me in the chest with his rifle butt, which knocked me over. The next thing I knew, I was led down the dunes with a lot of men lined under armed guard. There was abandoned German equipment everywhere. Americans were going through all this stuff. They were very pleased if they found a bayonet or an officer's cap. I suppose there were souvenirs for them.
Yeah, they are inveterate souvenir hunters, these Americana. I recently spoke to another German veteran who mentioned, and this is a bit of a stretch for the imagination, that he was surprised that the Allies had brought no horses with them for the invasion. Where are all your horses?
Yes, that was a surprise for us. We commented on it. If that had been a German army, even in 1944, there would have been a lot of horses and wagons in the supply element because we were short of fuel and trucks. In fact, one of our men stupidly asked one of the American guards, "But where are your horses?" The American just laughed at this and gave him a cigarette. We were quickly put on a ship and taken back to England overnight. We were relieved to have survived. In the ship, we sat in silence.
And in England, where were you held by the Americans or English?
At first, we were in a large camp run by Americans. After a month, we dispersed, and I was sent to a smaller camp in the north of England.
Did you notice differences between the Americans and the English?
Oh, there were differences. The English were quite similar to us Germans because they like repairing things. If a machine stopped working, an English person would enjoy trying to fix it. Others would gather around and give suggestions or tell him he was doing it all wrong. Then the man who repaired it would tell his friends how he fixed it. But the Americans, they wanted everything quickly, whatever the expense. So if a generator failed, it was, "Get me a new generator, damn it." And it had to be done at once. This was not our way because we had few resources. We thought making repairs was the right thing to do.
Yeah, agreed. And how were you treated in general?
The Americans and English followed the Geneva Convention very strictly, and we could not complain about our conditions. I was given medical treatment throughout my imprisonment. I was repatriated to West Germany in 1946 on a ship from Felixstowe.
So danke sehr, Herr Runder, for giving such a complete account of your experiences.
Can you tell me your name, age, rank, and unit at D-Day?
My name is Benjamin Alvarado. I was a 19-year-old private in G Company, 16th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, part of the 5th Corps, and 1st Army at D-Day.
Can you tell me how you came to come to England, Benjamin?
Well, I was 18, just finished basic training. I was at Camp Howes in Texas, and a sergeant came in and said to us, "We need volunteers to go overseas." I didn't know what all that meant, and no one said anything. And then he said, "Hey, how about you joining, Alvarado?" I said, "Well, I'll go when my turn comes." And he said, "Well, guess what? Your turn has come." You just love this. Go and pack your kit. And that's how I volunteered and wound up in England.
Can you tell me how you reached the beaches on D-Day?
Yeah, we boarded a ship, and we were on board for 3 days before D-Day. I had a hell of a headache, and I was feeling really seasick. When we arrived, it was night turning to early morning off the coast of France. We were preparing to transfer to landing craft. I remember it was real quiet on that ship.
So how did you leave the ship?
There was this netting on the side, and we climbed over the rail onto the netting. Now, full field gear with a pack and all that stuff, I was really worried about falling in. The water was choppy, the ship was going up and down. It would have been real easy to drop off and fall between the ship and the landing craft. And the landing craft crew were down at the bottom trying to hold that net taut.
And how many people were in the landing craft?
I guess there was about 30 or so, but I didn't know who they were. Everything was a secret, and nobody was wearing shoulder patches or insignia. My squad leader had no insignia, nothing. I'd never seen him before. He was a young officer, but we called him the old man. We said, "Well, the old man is here, so now we got a leader."
And where did you land and how did you get there?
We had to travel, I'm told, about 11 miles in this landing craft, going up and down, really, damn it, up and down. We were feeling sick, and we were under fire. When I left the landing craft, I was up to my chest in water, and I was the third one out. I can tell you I was scared. There were shots going off. It was just like a dream. I couldn't comprehend any of that. I just didn't foresee any of it. It was an awakening for me. We were on the second wave. The first wave had left a lot of dead along the beach and in the water. I tripped over some of them. I saw men hiding behind the beach obstacles. But that was no protection, as the shells were coming right down amongst them and killing them. I was really scared. I just kept running and running till I reached a shelf up above the beach. I think that's how I survived. And at just about that time, the old man, our leader, came over and said, "Men, you are on Omaha Beach, and this is Easy Red." And that was the first time I knew where I was. There wasn't any fighting. There was nothing to shoot at. We were being shelled and fired on. And more men were arriving and falling, but we couldn't see anything of the enemy.
Well, what did you do from there?
So the old man says, "Okay, men, let's get ready to move up." He just gathered us all up and who were there. The guys on my right were from the first wave of the 29th Division. There was mass confusion, but we all got up and followed the old man.
It seems like this young officer, or old man, was critical to bring order to chaos here.
Yes, he certainly was. There was a lot of dead soldiers around where the mines had been. Engineers were out in front trying to clear the mines away for us to go through, and we just followed them. When we got up on top, there was a machine gun emplacement that had to be dealt with, and this old man, he said, well, he was the one who took care of that. He just took them out. You could see how brave he was. We were just kids, but it looked like he knew exactly what to do, and we just followed him.
So when was the first time you saw any Germans?
Well, I don't know why, but our little outfit was the first to reach our destination. There were a whole load of Germans who wanted to surrender. And that gave me a lot of encouragement because I thought, these guys are meant to be the superior or the master race, but here they were just kids, just like I was.
Did you stop there?
No, We kept going and came under fire from sharpshooters and snipers. By this time, we had tanks up with us. The tanks took care of the snipers. But then we ran up against his German defensive positions, and the Air Force came in and bombed. They just devastated the German positions. I believe the Germans had lost about 70% of their strength. We were moving around where the Germans had been. We were so green, we had no idea if we heard a tractor or a tank, whether it was one of theirs or one of ours.
And you still hadn't fired your rifle?
Nope, not yet. At one stage, we were in between the Germans, who were in a hedgerow off to our left, firing their anti-tank guns over us at our tanks on our right. And we lay straight down there on the ground till nightfall, and they had all moved away, and then we moved on. We found ourselves at a road with a hedgerow and nobody else around. And then we heard this convoy coming, and we thought it was ours as it was going in the same direction. And all of a sudden, one of our little squad shouted, "Hey, these are Germans!" And you know, because of the crosses on the side rather than the stars, which would have made them our vehicles. First, there were 2 motorcyclists, and then this half-track, and then some trucks, about 3 more trucks, and then some tanks. I don't know how long that convoy was, but it was long.
Did you open fire on it?
You know what? It was the old man who jumped up and fired the first shot that killed the motorcyclists. Of course, that did away with our secrecy and all that. Then the half-track stopped, and the infantry jumped off from the trucks in the half-track, going in the opposite direction and running. At the same time, we were doing the same thing and going back, jumping into a ditch near an orchard. We didn't know what to do. We could see the Germans were getting organized, though, running and hitting the ground and running and hitting the ground. And that's when I opened fire and shot the first of the Germans. It slowed them down. And the old man said to me, "Alvarado, well done. I'll recommend you for the Infantry Combat Badge." And that's how I got it.
Well, what happened next?
Well, we didn't have any armor with us, no tanks, but the old man got on the radio and asked for support, and he got us all together. A German tank had followed us into the orchard, and one of our men, who had a bazooka, got up and fired at the German tank, splitting the track so it couldn't move. The German tank couldn't depress its main gun low enough to fire at us in the ditch, but he was still using his machine gun. And one of our Shermans came up, but couldn't see the German tank, which fired on it first, but the round glanced off our tank like ping. By this time, our tank, while it was still moving, had traversed its turret and fired on the German tank, destroying it. And then a German Red Cross truck came around, but there was nothing they could do, and we didn't fire on it. Meanwhile, 4 more of our tanks came up, and they engaged the other Germans, and we fired on their infantry. After our tanks destroyed 2 more Germans, the German tanks withdrew. I'm told 50,000 prisoners were captured on that day, but I don't know for certain. I thought the war was going to be over quickly. I was dead wrong. So can you tell me your name and the role you played on the 6th of June?
My name is Thomas Baker. I was a lieutenant attached to Jagdamtschnittführer 5, leading Fighter Group 5, in the area north of Ivor, Normandy.
Can you tell me the situation in the Luftwaffe leading up to June 6th?
We did not have enough aircraft, spares, fuel, or experienced fighters to be an effective force. Planes were left on the ground due to lack of spares or even coolant. This meant units took off below strength, resulting in even more losses against the huge Allied formations. We were flying combat missions around the clock with the younger, inexperienced pilots whose lifespan was getting shorter and shorter. Each man was overstretched, stressed, and tormented.
Herr Baker, the Allies were very active in the air in the build-up to the invasion, weren't they?
Extremely active. The British RAF came over at night, causing huge destruction to the French railways, road junctions, and that sort of thing. Everything was flattened. The French didn't have air raid shelters like us in Germany or the English in London. I heard in one raid 500 French civilians died. The French would complain bitterly about the Allied bombing, which was ruining the little towns and villages, especially around transport routes. Many of us had lost relatives in the bombing in Germany, so we sympathized with them.
Yeah. And did you ever fly at night?
My Geschwader squadron was not equipped for night fighting, but we regularly caught RAF aircraft around dawn if they were returning over France. And the Americans carried out raids in the daytime. we were regularly set up against American Yabo and twin-engined bombers. The problem was the number of the airframes. The Allies had much newer and more modern aircraft.
What were your duties on the night of June the 5th?
The night before, on the 5th, it was the birthday of one of our pilots, and we had a party to mark this event. After the senior officers left, we were joined by several French ladies who were well connected locally and excellent company. Everything was going fine until about midnight, where there was a great build-up of aircraft overhead. The ladies were very upset. They said, "You must save us from those salut anglais, English bastards," and similar things. We sent a squadron car to return them to our homes and opted to get a few hours' sleep. It seemed likely to us we would be needed at daylight, and we needed to be reasonably fresh. A few hours of rest were the best contribution we could make to the war effort at that moment.
So on the morning of the 6th, did you wake up yourself, or did someone have to wake you?
Good question. My orderly woke me before first light, and we drove to the airfield. Strangely, the Allied air effort had slackened, with just a few individual planes in the sky. We drove past an Allied glider which had crashed into one of the meadows. Some of our troops were nearby searching for the occupants. They told us to beware of paratroopers and glider troops. After breakfast, when light was full, a wave of enemy fast bombers came over, but fortunately they attacked the nearby dummy airfield.
A dummy airfield? Is this some kind of decoy?
Yeah, we had built a structure near our base which from the air resembled a runway and buildings, while our real facility was heavily camouflaged with nets and false trees.
Very clever. What aircraft were you equipped with?
The Messerschmitt 109 type Gustav, which was based on the original design from the 1930s, but with a new supercharged engine. It was small, light, and fast, but because of its small size, the fuel tank was very limited. In good hands, it was probably as good as the Mustang, but not as good as the new version of the Spitfire. The new Spitfire was a freak of a plane. It was faster than our latest Focke-Wulf.
Well, that's fast. Tell me what happened on the 6th of June?
We got into our cockpits about 6 that morning and sat there and waited. No orders came to fly. We were frustrated and anxious. A lot of planes were now going overhead. It was rather grey, damp morning, and the Allied planes' exhaust stood out brightly in the murky sky, and we just sat there. In the end, in mid-morning, 3 of us were ordered to take off and fly to the coast near Caen as an armed reconnaissance patrol.
Reconnaissance with a fighter? Was ME-109 suitable as a reconnaissance aircraft?
No, it was completely useless. Visibility was very limited forward because of the engine cowling. You had to dive on anything to see it. We had no bubble canopy, so we couldn't see behind us, and the wings obstructed our view to the side, and our planes had no radio communication to our base. We could only speak to each other. So you would have to survive the mission and return to give any report.
Erstaunlich. What sort of orders were you given?
As my ground crew was closing my canopy, my commander jumped up on the ladder and shouted to me that this was a vital mission, essential to the task of driving the enemy back to the sea. He gave me his personal Leica aviation camera in the hope that I could take aerial photographs with it. Under the circumstances, this act underscored his urgency, even though I knew the chances of being able to do this were almost zero. I stuffed the camera inside my seat harness and completely forgot about it.
Yeah, understanding. So what happened next?
I was the second plane of 3 to take off heading northwest to Caen. As soon as we leveled out, we were hit by a pair of Mustangs that tore through us before we knew they were there. I wasn't hit, but one of my comrades, the one whose birthday party it was the night before, was hit. As he banged below me, I remember an orange glow beginning to spread from his engine. His cowling flew off in pieces and flames shot back over the cockpit. I remember seeing him with his arms over his face like this, and then he was simply lost in all the flames. I gained height, going faster and always faster. The flak gunners were in panic and shooting at anything that flew. I was traveling at over 600 kilometers an hour, and the coast leapt up at me all of a sudden. I could see a massive line of ships out at sea, about 3 kilometers from the shore. I was astonished at the sight. I wondered if I was hallucinating or if this was some delirium of some sort. I've never seen such an assembly of ships. I'm not sure anyone will ever see such a thing again. Perhaps in human history. The sea was absolutely solid with ships, and that is no exaggeration. I turned to fly west along the coast so I could see the shoreline. These were the beaches the English and the Canadians attacked. I forgot the code names they used at the time.
Ja, west of Caen, that was these Gold and Juno beaches.
Golden Nuno, okay. For us, this was the Caen sector. The beaches were crammed with vehicles moving in on transport barges, even with tanks. There were fires burning, vehicles and boats on fire, and explosions from artillery. I saw flamethrowers being used inland, very powerful ones, and the flames lit up a wide area. The enemy was driving the bridgehead inland. It was clear to see. I took this all in within a matter of seconds and was stunned by the sight. There were many Allied fighters, and 3 of them came straight for me. I went down to minimum height, a maximum speed, which was safe because the land is so flat there, and the German flak would, hopefully, be less likely to misidentify me. I used a huge amount of fuel as far as St. Lo, by which time the Americans had turned back to England to refuel. I tried to estimate the number of ships at sea, but I couldn't do it. It was thousands, surely. Do you know what the figure was?
9, actually, I didn't know the number. It must be thousands, I agree.
I must be one of the very few Germans who saw that from the air. When I came to put down again on the airstrip, I saw on the runway the burning outline of our 3rd Messerschmitt. I found out later he returned with an engine fire and blew up as he came in. I was the only one to survive. Out of the 3, you see. The smoke from the fire attracted the enemy Yarbos. I think they now realized they had been attacking the decoy airfield and turned their fire on us. I ran to the main shelter to give my report as bombs were exploding around us.
You were extremely lucky. Did you fly again on the 6th of June?
The airfield was too badly damaged, and the orders that came through were contradictory. We were ordered to strafe the beaches, then leave the base and take the planes inland, then wait for orders. Each time we became more confused. Eventually, we moved to an airfield southeast and tasked with low-level strafing and intercepting attacking planes to protect our armor concentrations in the Caen area.
But how did you survive this battle?
I was injured in a crash landing and treated in a hospital near our base, which was overrun by the Americans. I don't know whether the Americans put their tallest men in the front line, but these fellows were close to 2 meters tall, all of them. After my capture, this is difficult for me. We were driven past thousands of dead Germans killed by Allied air attacks. This conversation has brought back many memories for me I've suppressed for years. I would prefer to stop our discussion at this point.
Danke sehr for the heartfelt and moving account you have given, Herr Baecker. Can you tell me your name, age, rank, and your unit on D-Day?
My name is Charles Dalton. I was a 34-year-old major commanding B Company, the Queen's Own Rifles of Canada. My brother, Elliot Dalton, commanded A Company on my right, I was one of 14,000 Canadians who landed in Normandy on Juno Beach on D-Day. I joined the Canadian Corps of the Queen's Own when I was 15 years of age.
Prior to D-Day, what had you learned from the slaughter of close to 1,000 Canadians during the ill-fated raid on Dieppe on the coast of France on August 19, 1942?
Oh, geez. At Dieppe, The soldiers stopped to help the wounded and were killed themselves. A moving target is harder to hit, you know. We told our men under no circumstances to stop to help the wounded. The Americans didn't learn this.
What was your first reaction when you heard you were going to take part in this invasion?
Well, we were tired of being away from home, so this was a step we had to take to return home for sure. We'd come over in 1941 in the summer. The English got used to us, and we got used to the English. But it wasn't home, you know. We trained a great deal. We knew, particularly after Dieppe, it was going to be tough. The Americans don't know anything about Canadian history. We had our father's generation reputation to live up to from World War I. We were not going to let them down, for sure.
Yeah, I understand that. What were your feelings as the landing craft approached the shore?
Of course, you're always frightened, no question about that, you know. So I kept thinking, what I'm really worrying about is whether I'm going to survive, but I've no choice about this thing. So the important thing is that I can give the leadership they're expecting from me because I have their lives in my hand. If I make the wrong decision, we'll all end up being killed or wounded for sure. And if I don't make any decision, we'll have the worst case of all, you know. So I better just get on with the idea of doing the best job I can and forgetting about whether I'm going to be sacrificed as we land on the beach. We passed one of our rocket craft on the way in. They fired rockets in batteries of 20 and killed lots of French cows, you know. Unfortunately, an American Thunderbolt was patrolling the beach at low level and they shot down one of our own aircraft. That was the first casualty we saw.
And what happened after the Royal Marines dropped the ramps on your craft and you landed?
Our landing craft had 2 sections of infantry, my small headquarters, and a section of combat engineers. When I said, "Follow me," and dashed down the ramp into 12 feet of water, I disappeared. I had an 85-pound pack on my back, you know, with ammunition and food and so on, plus I had a life preserver on, so we all just sank like stones. So when people say we ran up the beach, I say, ran? I was barely crawling up the beach. We were full of water, and our battle dress kept the water from running out. The man next to me was hit in the backpack. He turned and he said, "Whoa, that was close, you know." And the next burst killed him. We scrambled up the beach, and when I looked back, I was horrified to see that nobody was following me. Now, one of the difficult things about leading is that you never can look back, because if you do, the people behind you think you're stopping and they get down out of the light of fire, and you want them to keep running for sure. I thought they'd gone to ground, but in fact, most of them were lying at the water's edge, and the Germans were firing at them as they lay wounded. So in 10 minutes, of the 120 men in my company, we were virtually all killed or wounded, you know.
What did you do next?
Oh, geez. The pillbox I was assigned to attack was supposed to have been taken out by the engineers and the tank corps, but that didn't happen because the sea was too rough and the tanks were sinking right off the landing craft, you know, and the engineers had all been killed. So I pulled a bunch of soldiers together and headed to the pillbox, I recognized I wasn't going to get in for sure because the pillbox had a steel door and a 36 grenade wasn't about to blow it in. So I decided to use my Sten gun at the 2 machine guns that were firing. The problem was they had a shield over their guns so that nobody could fire in. Luckily, one of my group I pulled together had a ladder, and we put it up against the wall. I climbed up and fired at the shield with the hope that the bullets would ricochet off them and fly around inside the pillbox. And actually they did. So the machine guns stopped firing, but we were still no closer to getting in. Meanwhile, one of the German officers got his 9mm handgun out and fired at me. It drilled through my helmet and down the ladder I slid. One of our stretcher bearers had arrived on the scene. They said to me, "Sir, I thought you were smarter than that for sure. To stick your head over the top of that wall?" I said, "I wasn't trying to be smart. I was just trying to find some way to stop these people from firing, and at least I've accomplished that much, eh?" So when the tanks came up, they did just that, destroying the pillbox and killing everyone inside, you know.
And what did you do after the battle?
It was about 8:30 in the morning, I guess. and I was walking along the beach trying to catch up with what was left of my company. A medical officer saw the bandage on my head, and he took the dressing off and he put another bigger one on, and he said, "You'll be back in England tonight for sure." But I wasn't back in England that night. I was lying on a stretcher on the beach until 3 in the morning. People came along and put cigarettes in my mouth and gave me some rum. But after a while, you realized you were terribly uncomfortable with all that sand inside your clothes, you know. So on the 3rd day, we were put on a tank transporter, which is a large landing craft, and we were stacked up 3 high in stretchers. By that time, cigarettes are getting pretty scarce, but here's the kind of comradeship we had for sure. I would light a cigarette and take 2 puffs, and then pass it to the man above, who took 2 puffs. And if nobody cheated, it would go all the way up to the top rack and back down, and I'd get the last puff, eh? Well, most people would say, "Oh, here I am, and I don't even know if I'm going to be alive by tomorrow morning, so I'm going to take a really good drag on it." But nobody did. And that's what people missed when they got home. And that's why a lot of them signed up to go to Korea, you know.
Well, thank you, Major Dalton, and congratulations on the award of the Distinguished Service Order, which you received personally from General Montgomery.
Well, that's the end of our story, but it was only the beginning of the experiences from those we have heard from. They were among the fortunate. They survived as prisoners, casualties, or combatants, with the rest of the war ahead of them and their lives afterward. There was a lot of war left for those who made it to June 7th. For 2 months, they fought in Normandy's dense hedgerows before breaking out and pursuing the Germans across France, the Netherlands, Belgium, and finally Germany. By the war's end, 45,000 Canadians, over 400,000 Americans, and a roughly equal number of British had died. It is estimated between 24 and 26 million Russians and 5 to 8 million Germans died in World War II. Those Allied troops killed in the Normandy campaign are buried near the landing beaches. The Americans overlooking Omaha, the British near Gold, and the Canadians near Juno. Over 21,000 Germans are buried at La Combe, close to Omaha Beach, one of 6 German cemeteries. Today, over 2 million visitors every year walk those hallowed grounds. Dwight Eisenhower is as right today as he was on the June the 6th, when he wrote to the 175 soldiers, sailors, and airmen amassed for the largest invasion in history. "The eyes of the world are upon you." Thank you very much.